Mr. F talked about a climate of fear. I don't see a climate of fear in this country, and I don't think people are creating it. I don't think the government's creating it. If anything, I think people are not worried enough about the ideology which the young gentleman there referred to. Lord Heseltine talks about the freedom of the individual. Nobody disagrees with the idea of the freedom of the individual. But there is also a basic freedom, a very fundamental freedom, not to be blown up by jihadi terrorists, not to be the subject of plots from jihadi terrorists. And if there is a reason why there should be an extension, as is being proposed, and I admit that the government and security services are not making the case as clearly as they could, then it is simply this, which is that the denseness and the complexity of many of the plots which have been unravelled, and individuals, people sitting at their computers, often when arrests happen, hundreds of computers and hundreds of computer files have to be gone through. People use different names on different chat room forums. We look at this at my think tank every day. This is happening all the time. It is deeply complex. It is not a matter of simply finding out from 24 hours or 48 hours whether somebody's guilty or not. We have to give, I believe, we don't have to extend to 90 days, but we have to give, I think, the security services and the police the time that they feel they need to do the job they need to do, which we entrust to them.
56 days you go forward, you back
I think 56 days is fine.
Vince Cable?
I wonder whether Mr McNulty has read George Orwell's novel 1984, and if he hasn't, I suggest he does. And at the same time, does he think that the police are the best person to ask when you're considering giving the police more powers? Do you think the police are really going to turn around to you and say, no, actually, we don't want any more power?
Absolutely not, which is why since last June we've been consulted not just with the police and the service, but with local government, with communities, with a whole range of groups up and down the country, and haven't rushed headlong into legislation. And I have read 1984. It's actually one of my favourite books, and if you think there's any... Not because of the lessons it teaches me, because of the lessons it should teach all of us, but if you think 1984 bears any relevance to the legislative framework to tackle terrorism or anything else in this country, then I think you're on another planet with all.
Very difficult one. I mean, General Musharraf is fairly obviously not the ideal leader that we'd like to see leading Pakistan, or indeed any country with which we'd be allied. On the other hand, what are the alternatives at the moment? I would say that a tougher line has to be taken with Musharraf, as it should have been since 9/11. Dick Armitage is said to have said from State Department to the ambassador after 9/11, said to have said to the Pakistani ambassador, history starts today. Sadly it didn't. Mr Musharraf was able to get away with a lot of infringements on liberties in his country. He didn't crack down on the terrorists within his own country in the way he should have done, and we haven't been nearly as demanding of him as we could have been. We have to now be incredibly careful. First of all, that we're not so demanding of him that he falls. We know in the past, I'm thinking in particular perhaps of 1979 and the Shah, we know that regimes can have even worse leaders. And we have to be aware of that in Pakistan. But I would say that what is happening at the moment is undoubtedly reprehensible. Mr Musharraf is indeed in the last few days locking people up and putting people under house arrest.
But he's
mainly doing that
with the progressives and the moderates and the people who should be on side.
Should Britain and the United States put pressure on him to have the elections when he said he'd have them?
Yeah.
And for him to stand down?
Without doubt. The question was about public backing. We have to ask the follow-up, which is, do you really want police officers to have to stand down if their opinion ratings go down in the Evening Standard or the Times? And I don't think that we do want to live in a society that gets run by opinion polls, where we're policed by opinion poll. Now look, it's no surprise that health and safety was what was called in, where it's about the only thing left that you can beat people with these days in Britain. Everything's health and safety. And I have to say that we've already seen something of this creeping along with the army. I'd be very sorry if it got even worse with the police force. We've seen our army and our soldiers having to behave like lawyers, wondering if they're doing something which is going to get them up in a courtroom anytime soon. I don't really want to see this happening with the police. The lady in the back there talked about the scene of the crime. This was not a crime committed by our policemen. These were people who were risking their own lives to protect people like you and me, ladies and gentlemen. And I don't think that we should spit on that and call it a crime or call them criminals. And if I can just finally say that there's an absolute lack of seriousness about this whole debate. Vince Cable said somebody's got to go. Anybody. Let's just get rid of a top-ranking police officer. Well, ladies and gentlemen, at a time of serious public safety issues here, we face a real and determined enemy, which must be laughing tonight when they see politicians like Vince Cable calling for just any resignation.
No,
would you be happy that one of the people who knows most in this country about your security and mine should just go on a political whim? I don't think so. Well, it entirely depends on what you're talking about. Saying was Enoch Powell right is like saying was Margaret Thatcher right, was Tony Blair right. About what? About immigration? Well, which comments? Enoch Powell said some of the most appalling things about immigration, some which were patently untrue and were patently wrong. His comment that the black hand was going to hold the whip over the white hand was not only wrong, it was also a despicable comment. But was he right about the comment that immigration was going to change the face of Britain greatly? Yes, he was right. And as I understand it, that's what this particular candidate was arguing. When George Osborne and other Conservatives then come out and say that he was wrong to have said that, well, no, patently he wasn't wrong to have said that. The country has changed enormously, for better in some ways and for worse in others. But it is not wrong to say that the country has changed. I think it's astonishing that people are castigating this candidate for saying that one thing.
Because the word Enoch Powell was there, presumably,
Yeah.
that was why he got...
And there are a lot of people, I suspect including this Tory candidate, who would love to turn the debate about immigration into a debate about race. We mustn't let that happen.
No, but what you're doing is making sure that we cannot have the debate about immigration, because every time we do, somebody talks about Enoch Powell and the whole thing's shut down. Somebody does what
but
you've
who
just
raised
done, which is to say that if you raise immigration, you're going to be accused of racism. We have to grow up and get beyond that. The British people deserve to have a sensible adult conversation about that,
Of course
and to be able to say they want immigration to be limited without being accused of being Enoch Powell.
The woman in the third row in black, yes, you.
I think the issue here is that people are becoming terrified of speaking of immigration. I mean, the panel seems to draw a picture of a country where it's totally harmonious, where there are no issues, where there's no fighting over resources, where there are absolutely no conflicts or tensions between immigrants, and I don't believe that's true. And the problem is when people do try and speak about it and do try to capture public attention by maybe unfortunately using inflammatory language and comparison, this is what happens, and I don't think that's good for anybody.
Were you offended by the Enoch Powell speech? Did you find that an
I mean,
offensive
the
speech?
Enoch Powell speech was a speech made at a very different time to the time that we're in now, so I can hardly apply the morals and values and expectations of that time to how I feel. Now, if somebody said it to me now, I would be very offended. But you have to have a sense of perspective with these things. And when somebody says Enoch Powell was right, no matter how stupid he is, he's not, in this day and age, publicly sanctioning every single thing in that speech. I think that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
If there is overstretch with two really quite small conflicts in the grand scale of things, if there is overstretch, then we're really in trouble, ladies and gentlemen. Contra the confusions of one lady on the panel, this is not going to go away. There's not going to be a day soon when all troops can come home and you won't need armies. You're going to need them more, ladies and gentlemen, and that means you're going to have to spend more. And to quibble about 2% and nudging over 2%, you need to double the spending on the armed forces in this country. You're going to be serious about it. We spend less now as a percentage of GDP than at any time since the 1930s. 1930 itself, indeed. You've got to wake up. You've got to realise when we talk about spending money on healthcare and all of these things, and we quibble with the armed forces, particularly when we come up to this Sunday, we should remember nothing deserves more money and more support than people who are risking their lives for us.
Okay.